Uh, what we're going to do tonight is take a chance to hear from four people who were at Inclusion International's global conference in the United Arab Emirates in September. Three of them are from Canada, and the fourth is from Colombia, and I'll introduce each in just a moment. Uh, so we're very pleased to have you join us, and we're pleased to have our panel with us. Uh, just as a bit of introduction to the fact that we're looking globally here, over the last several decades, I've had the privilege of working in a number of countries, sharing Canada's experiences with inclusive education and learning from the experiences of people in other countries. Canada has often been seen as a global leader in this field. And while we recognize that many obstacles and challenges still exist within our own systems, we also continue to share our optimism about the potential of inclusive education and the power of collaboration between parents, educators, and communities to make it happen. Across countries with very different conditions and realities, what unites us is a shared commitment to children, to their human rights, and to ensuring that every child has the opportunity to learn and belong in a school attended by others in their community. Our conversation today brings together four remarkable leaders whose experience spans public policy, advocacy, international development, and lived experience. Each of our panelists has played a vital role in shaping how inclusion is understood and implemented around the world. So let me take a moment to introduce our panelists. First, we're joined by Diane Richler, an associate with Inclusive Education Canada and co-chair of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education with Inclusion International. Diane's recognized globally as one of the leading voices for inclusive education and disability rights. A former president of Inclusion International and chair of the International Disability Alliance, she's dedicated her life to transforming education systems so that all learners truly belong. Next, we welcome Monica Cortez, Executive Director of ASDOWN Colombia and co-chair of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education, which is a project or an initiative of Inclusion International. So Diane and Monica co-chair that effort. Monica is a parent and she's a tireless advocate for inclusive education and family-led advocacy, not only in their own country, Colombia, but in Latin America generally and globally. Through her leadership, ASDOWN has become a model for how families, educators, and governments can work together to make inclusion a lived reality for children with intellectual disabilities. We're also honored to have Jody Carr, a lawyer and former New Brunswick Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development, and a keen advocate for inclusive education. Jody brings a wealth of experience from his leadership in shaping inclusive education policy in New Brunswick and Canada, and including in his role of developing and actually signing into policy the New Brunswick Policy 322, which is recognized globally as a progressive statement of an education system about inclusive education. Jody's insights bridge government, law, classroom school practice, and showing how policy can become real change in schools. Finally, we're joined by Charlotte Pike. Charlotte's a project officer with Inclusion Canada, and she works significantly in the work of Inclusive Education Canada, and she's co-chair of the Sibling Working Group of Inclusion International. Charlotte represents a new generation of inclusion advocates, amplifying the voices of siblings and families in shaping inclusive systems of education. Her work connects national and international networks and reminds us that inclusion begins with relationships in the family and the community, and that's what makes a difference. Together, this panel reflects the full spectrum of what it takes to make inclusion a real thing: vision, leadership, family commitment, global collaboration. So let's begin our discussion by inviting each of our guests to share their perspective on the progress being made around inclusive education. And in particular, I want them to share one thing that they can bring from the Congress in the UAE in terms of inclusive education and the global situation regarding that. Let's begin with Diane.
Thank you, Gordon. Um, so first of all, it was extremely exciting to be in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. The last time we'd had an in-person meeting of Inclusion International was 2018 in Birmingham, England, and it had been a long time since we'd been able to see each other face to face. And I think that created an incredible energy. There were over 600 participants from over 70 countries. And notably, as you alluded to in your comments, Gordon, a younger crowd. Uh, the meetings used to be highly overrepresented by people from the global north and especially by men. And I must say that it was really a treat to have large representation, of course, from the East region, but also from all over Asia and all over Africa, and also to have a much younger crowd. So that was great.
No gray beards.
There might have been one, but you were missed, Gordon. You really were missed. Do you want me to go on with my comments now, or do you want to get
No,
everyone to just make
no,
a
I'd like
comment first?
everyone.
Okay.
Let's go to Charlotte next.
For me, I would say I had the privilege of also attending the World Congress in Birmingham with Diane as well. And I think that the big difference for me in Sharjah was the sibling presence. There were a lot more siblings, which was really, really great. And really, it gave me a lot of hope for the next generation of leaders.
Okay, Monica.
Yes, for me, it was really great to see families around the world that share the same things that we face in our countries, because sometimes we think that Europe is the best, and for me, it was really impact to see a lot of organization trying to see how this institutionalization panel, what happened with all the persons that in Europe are institutionalized. So for that reason, I consider that is a great space. And also, I talk with a lot of person about inclusive education. Of course, is a great point that many organizations, many families try to fight for a change, for understand what happened with inclusive education. So for me, it's great to hear and to give some ideas to all to achieve inclusive education.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Finally, Jody.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the commitment of I guess, the government of Sharjah from the highest levels as well in UAE in principle to inclusive education principles. Um, I was also taken or um, motivated in one sense by the challenges that while we have a large world that we seem so far apart, we're actually pretty close in similarities to our challenges. And the challenge is great and urgent for inclusive education across the globe.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Uh, Now get a little deeper into the discussion. Diane, back to you. And I should share with people that Diane and I have both been involved with this issue since the early 1980s. And probably a lot of people on this session weren't born then. I can pretty reliably predict Charlotte wasn't. But it's been a long time, a lot of struggles over the years to see progress, not only in Canada, but in other countries. And nobody's done more than Diane Richler to keep this going at a global level. And her perspective, I think, is one of the most important that we can learn from. So, Diane, with that, as the co-chair of Catalyst for Inclusive Education and someone who's worked globally, you've worked in Canada, but you've worked more recently globally. Uh, what kind of trends or what do you see emerging from the discussions you heard or participated in about inclusive education at the World Congress?
Thank you, Gordon. And it's a bit ironic that you would use the words to describe me that I would use to describe you. But anyway, that's very nice. Thank you. You know, when I was getting ready for Sharjah, I was in a very depressed mood. And I was feeling depressed because of the trends that I was seeing globally around international development in general and funding of education and inclusive education in particular. And there, you know, we had many years of progress. And since the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we really saw governments and multilateral institutions and civil society paying a lot more attention to including learners with disabilities. But we really hit a brick wall over the last couple of years, particularly with the election of Donald Trump and the changes to policies in the United States that have had global repercussions. Even before that, we were dealing with about of the 240 million children approximately with disabilities in the world, about half more likely to not be in school than those without disabilities, about half not to have any basic academic skills, about half having never attended school. But we were making progress little by little. And in this picture, the excuse me, the USAID, the United States Development Agency, was the largest donor to international development projects and specifically to education. So when they cut about 80% of their funding, that had a significant impact. Our director of Inclusion Africa, Fauzia Haji, mentioned that in Kenya, for example, the reductions in US aid led to the elimination of the Kenya Primary Literacy Program, which had been training about 100,000 people a year on inclusive education. So that was pretty dramatic. And we've seen cutbacks by other countries in international development, Germany, the UK, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Canada. And a lot of those cases, money has been redirected from international development to defense. And it's understandable why that's happened, but it's had a real chilling effect on funding of education. And so the donors are trying to figure out how to still make progress in education. And they're trying to come together in new and different ways. Too often, they're doing that on issues that could contribute to inclusive education or including learners with disabilities, but they forget learners with disabilities in their planning. And so, as I said, when I left for Sharjah, I was depressed. I was really in a bad state. And then I got there, and there are like these 600 or 700 people who all want the same thing, who are energized. And we heard the most amazing stories from sisters and brothers, as Charlotte said, from parents, from family members, from government officials, and who were really committed and energized. And you couldn't, or at least I couldn't help but being affected and infected by that energy. And I thought that one of the interesting observations that was made to me by someone who attended, but who's from outside of our network, he was impressed by the fact that we had people there. The base was our members. The base was people with intellectual disabilities and their families. But we had people like Jody, who were ministers or senior government officials. We had policy experts in data, in other forms of policy. Um, we bring together people with know-how so that when we make proposals, they're not just based on fantasy and what we wish for, but they're based on really solid examples of what can make a difference. So I think it was inspiring that there were good examples of inclusive education from all regions. Certainly, it was challenging to realize how far we have to go, but I have to say that I left in a much better frame of mind than when I arrived.
That's good to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And we know, like, we hear similar things in Canada these days. I try to remain an optimist and to focus on the positives. And there are many positives still at play in Canada, but we also have to recognize the challenges and the fact that for many, many parents, and we hear from them at Inclusive Education Canada, who are struggling with basic things that um, should be taken for granted in a country like ours. But let's go to Colombia now. Monica, as a parent, you're a former teacher, and you've sort of built ASDOWN Colombia into a pretty powerful force in your country to advocate for individuals and for inclusive education. And of course, in recent years, you joined Diane, leading the Catalyst Initiative. Uh, the reality in Colombia is, I think, still safe to say, quite different than Canada. But how did you feel about looking at what people had to tell you in Sharjah about inclusion, and how do you relate it to your own country? And maybe you visited Canada a few times. Make a connection to Canada if you like.
Yes, Gordon, we learned a lot from New Brunswick also in my life to understand what is the really inclusive education. And when you ask me about Colombia, yes, I consider that analyzing all the countries in our region, for me is really great that Colombia is the only country in the region that don't here you can find a special education in the school special schools. So this is good because here in Colombia, all the children in our policies said that they can go to the school that you can select. That is near to your home, where do you live, where the children live. But of
Oh,
course,
just let me clarify. You're telling us that there are no publicly funded special education schools in
no,
Colombia. The
no, we
public
don't.
education system includes all children. Children have a right to
All
choose.
children.
Okay,
Yes,
that's
all
great.
children. It's great, but of course we have, for example, now this year and in the last month, a great fight because the Minister of Education said that we need to continue closing a small classroom. I don't know, Gordon, if you remember that we have transitory classrooms, something like that said,
Right.
and the government, our Minister of Education said that they don't have more time to maintain these spatial rooms in the schools, so they can move the students to all to the inclusive education, and the support teachers, the teachers said that they need these rooms because some children needs these special classrooms, but the government and the secretaries and minister are decided to close. But of course, I understand that we need more support teachers, we need more funding education for all, not only for one type of children. We need to invest in a better education for all. But for us, it's really important. We have a group of families with us trying to fight for this, to disappear the special rooms. But of course, you have another part of families trying to fight for these rooms because they say that the children can go to the regular school because they don't have the best that they have in these rooms. And this is the small step that we need to finish to go close these rooms in order to all the children go to the mainstream classrooms.
What
But
was your
this,
what was your impression of the things you were hearing at the Congress? And how did your experience in Colombia connect to that?
I consider, Gordon, that in the major part of the countries exists special education, like schools. So people said, "It's really everybody go to school? I can't believe it. This is not true. The children are good." For example, now before to start this webinar, some mom from Spain sent me some videos where they can see that the teachers in the regular school may bullying to a guy with a disability. Yes, I know that probably this kind of teacher exists, but it's not the regular things that happen with all
Right,
the children in the schools. Yes, but these kind of things are used to promote that the special school is the best and so on.
right,
But I feel, I don't know if Diane feel and Jody, that the Emirates Arab are trying to understand what happened with inclusive education in our countries. Yes, because they want to make inclusive education, but they don't understand because they have the medical model. They need to change the children before to go to school. For example, a mom there from Arabia told me that her son, that is a Down syndrome boy, present CI, the test to go to continue with the schools, but they don't complete the note in the test to go. And I said, no, it's not necessary because he can go to learn more if we can give them some supports and different things. And but they are medical in the medical model, and they feel that the children needs a lot of therapies and many things in order to be better to go to school. So this pass in this zone, but I consider that, for example, Australia, New Zealand, they talk about inclusive education in a good sense, and I consider that in our region we have some good experience talking about inclusive education. You know, Gordon, that we, for example, here in Colombia, we take the New Brunswick model, the characteristic, the profile of teacher support. And here in Colombia, we change this idea that the teacher support is only to attend the children with disabilities. In Colombia, we have the idea now that the support teacher is for teachers to
right,
work with all the teachers in the schools. And
right,
now, each time the universities and the teachers understand more this kind of functions that they need
right,
to make, but not only be with the students with disabilities.
right.
They need to work with the teachers. They need to work with families. They need to work with all the community in the school. So we have now, Gordon, a big group, I said, of support teachers that understand this.
Right,
And I consider that is a good idea. Of course, we need continue working with
right,
these
right.
teachers in order to be better this idea that we learn in New
Well, if
Brunswick.
inclusion is going to work, teachers need support. Any one
Yes,
teacher doesn't have all the answers.
yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, thank you,
This is
Monica.
true.
I want to move to Charlotte now. Uh, Charlotte, your participation was focused around siblings, brothers and sisters of a individual with a disability, and looking at the ways that siblings could be participants and advocates and supports for advancing inclusion for their brothers and sisters. What can you share with us about the discussions you had in Sharjah, what the expectations of people are and what they saw as the opportunities?
For sure. So just to give everyone a little idea about what the sibling working group is, this group was created by Inclusion International to better understand and elevate the sibling perspective in our inclusion movement. So our goal is to look at sibling advocacy globally and figure out how we can tap into the sibling involvement in decision making in order to help shape the direction of inclusion. So the biggest insight from the sibling working group that we brought to the World Congress was really about how siblings experience inclusion, which is as something that's always been part of our world. For many of us, there was never a moment that we had to learn that our brother or sister had an intellectual disability. We just grew up with them. So when we talk about the sibling perspective, that's what we mean. Inclusion isn't something that we had to learn. It's something that we've lived from the very start of our lives, and it's our norm. So we expect that our sibling with an intellectual disability is going to be included. So this gives us a bit of a different lens on inclusive education. So we are actually in a really powerful moment in time right now. So that is that in many countries around the world, not all, obviously, but the siblings that have just reached adulthood are the first generation of siblings who grew up not only with our brothers and sisters in our home rather than in institutions, but also for many of us attending school with us in the same school. So a lot of us grew up watching how our brothers and sisters were or weren't included in school. So we can easily notice when inclusion is genuine and when it's just exclusion within inclusion. So, a couple of important things from the World Congress were that a lot of siblings want to lead, and we want a clear role in the family advocacy movement. Something that's also really unique to the sibling experience is that we can help drive a more holistic understanding of what inclusion is. So, one that connects classroom experiences to family life and then um, to community belonging. So, we can also bridge the generations. So, our parents' advocacy and all of your advocacy as panelists here tonight opened the doors to inclusive education, and our generation of siblings has grown up inside of those. So this makes us a really powerful connector between what inclusion currently looks like and then what it still needs to become. So I think, from my perspective, if we really want inclusion in education to continue to advance, we really need to intentionally bring siblings into leadership.
If that's what brought Diane away from the conference, being enthusiastic and have renewed hope, it certainly seems like it would be a good source of that. I take it you did hear from some of the siblings who were present, Diane. Okay, moving over to thank you, Charlotte. That was great. Uh, Jody, let's hear a little bit of your reflections. You've been uh, a politician, a policy maker. Uh, in recent years, I know as a lawyer, you've been involved in some individual casework and advocacy. But uh, what do you see, and based on your experience in Sharjah, talking to other people from around the world, what do you see as the necessities for good policy and good legislation that unfortunately If it exists, it doesn't seem to always be implemented, and in many cases, it simply doesn't exist. So, what are your reflections on that?
Well, we just heard from some fabulous participants at the World Congress who's on this panel, and Charlotte really shone brightly. Diane had shared that with us, her perspectives last night as well, and Charlotte is part of the team to organize the Congress. So right here from Canada was quite um, impressive. And I guess leaving the Congress um, are the same ingredients that Gordon you've espoused on us and me over the years. Families being key to the movement. Charlotte emphasized that as siblings can step up. Um, and hearing the stories of individuals with people with disabilities and the impact of good inclusive practices, but the impact of exclusion and segregation. Um, so the key ingredients being the families, those levers. Also, we share a lot of similarities around the world in terms of those gaps that exist, the gaps in terms of people within our own movement that um, uh, are not grounded in good definitions of inclusive education. And a feeling as well amongst participants that the movement is very vulnerable to slide backwards without being negative, as I want to stay optimistic, Gordon, but that it was a call to me that um, maybe now more than ever with the change shifting in budgets, shifting in priorities, multiple distractions of different types of issues around the world getting attention, that if we're not intentional about our strategies and our efforts, then it won't happen by itself. It never has. And I think it was a call to say, let's regroup from the top, from leadership, but connecting to families on the ground, in the communities, in schools, and relying on family advocacy organizations like Inclusion Canada, who I know have just invested in additional resources for inclusive education across the country. But we do need to galvanize as a movement, because other movements, other interests across the globe, whether it's economic, political, defense, other types of diversity issues, they're getting the attention, and we really need to push that forward as well. I really enjoyed going to Sarja. They invited me to go to the Legislative Consultative Council building to have an interview on Sarja TV. Of course, that was right up a politician's alley for me to go and again, really, governments talk a lot about wanting to be inclusive, but the actions and the results waver. And probably that's now no different than it was a few years ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It's just that it has to be constant and intentional. I was really proud to hear about countries like Colombia, as well as Portugal, and I can't help but being proud, Gordon, to know that your fingertips are tentacles out in these countries that are being recognized for teacher support models. Portugal has been recognized under the leadership research of inclusive education, Inclusion International research around leadership with inclusive education. Paula Hunt mentions about the intentional, just an intentional leadership under Portugal. And I know several years ago, you invested a lot of time and effort in Portugal, and that seems to be bearing some results. So, so encouraging, and and those levers that we have are policy and court and families are essential.
Okay. Thank you, Jody. Uh, can we just kind of shift around a little bit? And Diane, you spent a lot of time in the last number of years with your Canadian background working globally. And I guess I'm interested to learn what you think international commitments that Canada's made through various agreements and conventions and so on, whether you think they've actually resulted in change in Canada, and have we been able to leverage the fact that our country as a whole and our provinces have signed on to these agreements if it actually shows up back here in Canada? Can you just share your thoughts about that? Does it matter that they go to the UN and sign a charter? Microphone.
Yeah, I didn't want you to hear me coughing. Um, I think that there are different dimensions to that, Gordon. Um, I think there's, a narrow dimension in terms of, especially if you look at education, because education is a provincial and territorial responsibility, and international work is the responsibility of the federal government. There's not a direct link there. So even though we've tried to interest the Council of Ministers of Education in some issues, that hasn't really worked so well. I think what has worked has been to be able to build credibility for the the inclusion movement in Canada with the federal government because of our global the respect we have globally, and because we've been able to actually help the government to fulfill their roles. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think that in the past, and Gordon, this was your idea as a someone who understands politics, not only policy but politics, is that we could win support from the federal government by giving them ways to shine globally. And so we worked with them to be able to have them make statements about inclusion in various international summits that were hosted in Canada, in work that they did to promote the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child when shortly after that was adopted. And we gave them a reason to brag about Canada, but it also was a way to promote Canadian values beyond our borders. And I think that there are some real opportunities right now that we have not capitalized on. And here's my plea to Inclusion Canada, that Canada right now is playing a very key role in some global education decision making around funding and around policy. Canada has a representative on the executive board of UNICEF. We have a representative on the high-level steering committee of Education Cannot Wait, which funds education in emergency and crisis situations. We have representation on the board of the Global Partnership for Education. Those are three of the main actors in promoting what happens in education more broadly, not just inclusive education. And if Canada paid attention to inclusion in those venues, I think Canada could have a big impact. Most important right now is that there's a new initiative that was started by Gordon Brown, the former president of the United Kingdom, called the International Financing Facility for Education. The mechanism for financing is much too complicated for me to understand, but it has something to do with blending loans and grants so that money invested by wealthier countries can multiply so that $1 can become $7, and it multiplies exponentially. Canada is a key actor in that facility. We're listed as one of the foundational donors, and we have two representatives out of a very small board of directors, a voting member who's from Global Affairs Canada, and a non-voting member who's a professor in Toronto at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. We need to get to those people. Inclusion Canada needs to get to those people because that would be a way for Inclusion Canada to take leadership within Inclusion International and really have a big impact on what happens. Because right now, the big decisions that are being made around education globally are ignoring kids with disabilities, just completely ignoring them. And so, but there's an opportunity there. So hopefully one of the follow-ups of this webinar can be actually looking at those issues in detail and seeing how can Canada become more engaged in Inclusion International as through advocacy and not just in terms of the more traditional contributions.
Thank you, Diane. And that leads me to maybe go over to Monica again. And what Diane said, like in the 1990s, what's now Inclusion Canada, which community living at that time, there were some major grants that were able to be obtained that funded a lot of work in Latin America. And one of the places where I think we've seen good results from that is in Colombia. The fact that Canada established relationships with people throughout Latin America. And I wonder, Monica, can you just share with us your thoughts about why it's important for Canada to be a leader in sharing the sense of mission and what's possible with our colleagues and friends in other countries in this hemisphere? How much has that made a difference to you in Colombia? The fact that you're linked to global partners, but in this case, more specifically, Canada.
Gordon, I think that, as Diane said, we have better times. For example, in this moment, we have financial issues, for example, from Education Cannot Wait, not from Canada, but I suppose that Education Cannot Wait also receive money from these states because they support, for example, here in Colombia, inclusive education in emergencies. Yes, increases. And with Inclusion International, we show to ECW and also to here in Colombia to our government that the principles that we handle with inclusive education are the principle for all the children who are face crisis, humanitarian crisis like the war, like the climate change and different things. They need the migrants, they need also flexibility, they need also to support, they need also different things that we handle in our principles to inclusive education. So this is one interesting job because we learned a lot and also we understand that inclusive education is for all, not only for children with disabilities, but we need to push that they stay there also because, as you know, the best way that the school said, no, it's better, we have a lot of problems, we need to continue, but these children know. So we need to push that children with disability stay also there in the school. So we are working in this process, and also the German cooperation is also support us another project also pushing that children with disabilities and migrants and other children that are facing different difficulties to achieve the place in the school can go. So I suppose that, as Diane said, Canada can push UNICEF, for example, now also as Dawn is working with UNICEF in other process, working for disabilities children that stayed in different programs. So this is new because UNICEF here in Colombia is not really interested in disabilities. Only now they are working with us. So I consider that we can change many things, that the money continue moving, and also we continue showing to our government that the inclusive education is the best way to make best schools for all children, not
Right,
only for children with disabilities, but
right,
we need that they stay there in the schools, and we need more support teachers and
right,
different things that in the
right.
school.
Okay, back to you, Charlotte. Was there any particular story or any particular country that you can recall from your discussions in Sharjah that linked siblings and their actions and advancing inclusive education? Anything come to mind?
One of our siblings spoke about, we had some sibling discussions in Sharjah, and one of our siblings spoke about her experience of how close she was with her sister with an intellectual disability and growing up with her. Um, and how just their normal relationship that they had, just sibling to sibling. Um, and you know, I think what's really interesting about education is that, for siblings that experience inclusive education, we're asking when our sibling isn't there. So something that she shared is like, um, that what came out of our discussion really was that, you know, uh, we are asking, like it's our norm that our sibling is having lunch in the cafeteria, that they're playing basketball at lunch, that they are in a regular classroom. We're asking when they're not. Like it's weird when they're not. So that was something that stuck out to me, her story about that. Yeah.
Is there any country or part of the world that you think are facilitating sibling participation that stood out in the discussions? Anybody who's sort of doing that better than maybe many others, or
I
maybe
know that
not the case?
um well I know that in Europe they have a I think they have more of like a sibling presence, a sibling connecting group. I also met someone from Japan who runs a group for siblings in Japan.
Right.
So and part of our work as a siblings working group at Inclusion International is sort of to connect with all those people because we exist all over the world, but we're not necessarily connected. So
Right.
we're trying to start that.
Yeah. It occurs to me that through Inclusion Canada and Inclusive Education Canada, we could try to first survey, find out more stories, and maybe try to link people together in this country more effectively. So it's something we can look to. Okay, Jody, we're down to our second time around with our panel, and I guess I'm curious about what you think your leadership as a minister of education and an advocate, how it connects to what you see has happened in other countries. Like, what's the perception? Like, I know both you and I've met visiting politicians who've been interested, but we didn't always see that they actually took the challenge and followed up back in their jurisdiction, whether it was a country or a state. But do you have any insights on what it takes for a political leader, a policy setter, to go from good intentions to actually decisive actions? And did you get any feeling of that from any of the participants that you talked to in Sharjah?
Uh, well, I think that the experience that I've had in New Brunswick has translated in terms of interest around the world to hear and have me speak and share from a former minister's perspective, and um, trying to make other countries or people feel like that it's not like we're completely different. We're actually quite a bit the same as other countries and other places. Being a small state or province in Canada, often under-resourced, and trying to, do good for our students, then we have a lot of similarities around the world. So trying to say, yes, we can do it, and we have challenges and they can do it as well. So I think there's been a lot of interest in hearing about it and using that to instigate, and people do seem to like that. But I think we get back to the challenge of moving it to action. Um,
Well,
very similar. Hmm?
sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that it seems to me happens is ministers of education often don't
Well,
want to do things that are controversial. And
yeah,
making schools inclusive is still seen, is it not, in most places as
yes.
controversial.
Yeah. And so a lot of places want to talk, or a lot of ministers and governments talk about giving parents choice, because, that's easy, actually. You give all parents choice, and then people with disabilities have no choice, really. But um, the leadership ability of ministers, I think, over the last 20 years has declined, and nobody wants to take a chance of getting roughed up unless they're catering to a populist kind of mantra. And so it's very difficult. It's difficult. So you have to say where can you make the difference? And then you've got to go back, I think, to the basics of families, of connections. Who knows those people on the board of UNICEF? As Diane said, that's the strategic Diane and Gordon from the 90s that we have to keep getting back to say, okay, who do we know and who can make the best pitch? And Charlotte's onto something about the siblings and speaking and making things happen. But there was one I was happy with, was Rio de Janeiro, the director of inclusive education, still called special education, but I was on a panel with him, the director in the state, and really seeming excited about moving forward with inclusive education. I think they're down to like three special schools, and now, like, I can see us in them from, a few years ago, when they have a lot of special classrooms in their schools and have to move to the next step of integrating into so that was exciting to hear that there's possibilities of interest to help motivate to go to those next steps. They seem to have a governor that's quite supportive of inclusive education. So that was something I caught on to, which was really quite
Right.
quite exciting.
Well, unfortunately, if ministers make a commitment to inclusive education, it means there have to be considerable changes, and in most cases that means investing more money. And eventually money becomes one of the big issues. Like, how do you have more support teachers and more training for teachers and more and more? And maybe it takes considerable courage for a
Eh,
policymaker to say, I'm going to go down this path, and I know there are going to be demands for a lot more than what we have now.
And then when I was at the Summer Institute in Prince Edward Island, Gordon, you led that in 2002, I think it was.
Don't say
And
years, please. Stop doing
yeah,
that.
yeah. And so then after I left, I was committed and believed, because I knew it was the right thing. I was convinced and knew it was. Not only just kind of said it was, but I knew it and felt it. And then, when you know it and believe it and see it, and then can put the vision in place, then you work through the little challenges. The courage isn't quite as necessary once you have and the knowledge.
Right.
Um,
But getting leaders to have that confidence and knowledge is a challenge.
It's a very
Okay,
much a
we've
challenge,
gone
very
around
much.
our circle here twice, and we know that's what they do on CNN panels, so it must be a good idea. And before I'm going to tell people who are listening, if you want to post a question or a comment that we can have our panel react to, please do it now. But while we're waiting for that to happen, if it does, is there anything any of you want to ask each other or comment? You know, keep it brief because our time's going, but open up, turn your mics on, and go to it. If you don't, I will.
Well, I'm going to start with a question to Charlotte because I think that there's a real power in the sibling movement, um, both because of, what you said in terms of the different perspective on inclusion, but also because of regenerating the leadership within the movement. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about the sibling working group to give some ideas of how that group can be mobilized to not just share information, but to start actually influencing what's happening both in your own countries. Like, as Gordon said, I don't know how much sibling participation there is around across Canada. There was many, 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 many years ago an organization called Youth Across Canada. It was had an acronym that we wouldn't use right now, but I'll give you a hint by saying that it was called YACMAR. And but that disappeared many years ago, and I think we've lost that. And the other thing that you referred to is that, in places like New Brunswick and many other places, young people who aren't siblings also went to school and were part of, the lives of people with disabilities. I know my godson's classmates had a huge impact on his life, huge impact. I don't know now that they're in their 30s how much that's influenced their future careers, but it would be interesting to know that. And I just found it interesting, even through just coincidentally meeting people from New Brunswick and finding out that, well, they had gone to school with, the son or daughter of somebody that I knew, and that led to a career decision. So just talk to us a little bit about some of the potential and what you see as possible.
For sure. Thank you for asking that question, Diane. Our sibling group is full of so many wonderful, young, eager people from across the world, which is um, really, really hopeful for me. And I think that we're starting to have discussions about like what does sibling leadership look like? How do we kind of share our voice? Because our voice is different. It's sharing like this is our norm. This is just what's typical for us. How do we kind of take that and then move the needle even further? And really trying to, share that perspective and ensure that um, we're not trying to replace anyone. We're not trying to replace any seats. We're just trying to have a seat at the table to share our perspective. Um, and having those connections is really critical. A lot of things that we're doing right now is on, again, like leadership in the movement. And then also like a peer support group for siblings to know, like it is normal for us to probably care for our sibling. There are people out there that is not maybe what they want to do, but for us, the people that have gathered and have brought themselves to the movement, that is very normal. Um, they have that relationship with their sibling. It's like, of course, they're gonna be part of my life forever. I'm gonna take care of them just like I would support any other family member. So having conversations around that as well. Um, and really, that's sort of where we're starting right now. I think I'm really excited about all the people that are involved and that want to be involved. And I think that, like I grew up in the New Brunswick education system. So everyone that I went to school with also went to school with several students with intellectual disabilities, and that was their norm. So they know them in the community. Like my brother, he knows so many people in our city because he went to a school that was inclusive. Um, but he wouldn't have those connections had he not had that. So even all of my friends, like it's normal to be around people with intellectual disabilities, which I think is so powerful because then all of those people then carry that into their careers. They expect um, diversity in their workplace, even though they're not a family member. They expect it everywhere. They expect it in their community, at the grocery store, at a cafe, at a gym. It's normal. So I think that um, kind of being able to tie all those perspectives is important, and it's also that it exists is also what kind of is exciting to me.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great.
Great, Juliet.
I have one question or situation that's been posed. I want to recognize it and see if any of you want to respond to it. I think it's somebody from Alberta because they refer to what's going on in Alberta now and the risk of their province going backwards. And we know that teachers have been on strike, and there's controversy in Alberta in education at this time. But the question is, if we focus on being a global inspiration for people, kind of sharing our good experiences, are we in danger of not attending as we need to the challenges at home in Canada? And in particular, the way it's recently been defined as involving children who have complex needs, which seems to be a new way of getting off the label, well, disability, intellectual disability. So those words aren't used, but it's complex needs, which by implication seems to infer that this is maybe beyond the capacity of a teacher or a school to attend to. So anybody, any response to that? This parent, I don't know if it's a parent, but this person, individual, has asked, is there a danger in Canada spending focus on being an example internationally as opposed to the risks that are happening here at home?
I think
Gordon,
Gordon,
I believe that the families needs to see good experiences, because when we can see that the other mom that with her son with complex needs can go to school and can join with the others, stay there, families saying, oh, okay, my son also can. Yes, we need to show more,
Right.
because when, how I said, when we show bullying and something like that, everybody said yes, they can go to school. But if we can show that it's possible, that they can stay there with the supports and they can share with the other children and learn and stay there, it's really best for this family to fight. And we need to show more good experiences. We
And
was
share those
talking
not
with
just with
Diane.
families, but with teachers. We have to share these positive experiences with educators as well. Jody, you have
Yes, yes.
something.
yeah, just I wanted to say this risk of going backwards. What I found in Sarja at the World Congress is a common feeling of not going backwards necessarily. Sometimes people talked about that, but the risk and the fear now seems to be increasing and shifting under our feet. So, and in terms of should Canada get involved internationally, always think, and I think Inclusion Canada, you talked about partnerships within Colombia and others over the years, that it's not an either or, but you get Inclusion Canada gets involved So it's a win-win so that you can leverage the global efforts with improvements in Canada as well. So hopefully, uh, I feel that's still the same kind of approach. It's not an either or it shouldn't be anyway. So I agree on that. And funding, it's kind of something that is an annoyance for me because funding, there's always a shortfall of funding, no matter what type of system there is around the world in education. You have segregated systems, highly segregated, that are crying for more funding from their governments and feel there's not enough funding. So the segregated systems are no more funded, or certainly have a lot of lack of funding as well, and the inclusive education systems need support. So hear that there's not enough funding no matter what in education. And if I have a limited amount of funding, then my choice is always an inclusive education. But there's a myth that inclusive education costs way much more. And we have funding cuts. And that's, yes, we have funding cuts, but it's not because it's inclusive education. It's because there's lack of priority in education of our governments. And we do need to demand through our parents and families and governments to push for more funding and more support. That's a must.
Okay. We have just a few minutes left. I'm going to give each of you a chance to say one sentence, and hopefully an optimistic one, that you can share with people who've tuned in. And we know many more people are going to watch this video as we post it at a time convenient for them. Whatever time we select, it's not going to work for everybody. So each of you, one final observation. Charlotte first.
For me, I think that sometimes in our work, it's really hard to see the wins the next day, the next week, the next month. But I think that um, change will happen if we keep chipping away at it. And we really need to trust that the micro wins and the micro changes will make a drastic difference in years to come.
Thank you. Monica.
Today we have the power of communication, and we must take advantage, sending clear message about the power of growing together and how we can truly achieve in a life in a community.
Okay, thank you. Jody.
Especially in a country like Canada, Diane mentioned about the lack of central Department of Education or leadership in Canada. Now more than ever, we need inclusion. We need Inclusion Canada to provide that consistent national leadership, working with provinces and mobilizing coherently to provide the efforts that are needed at all levels. And I am encouraged to have learned about recent additional investments by Inclusion Canada for resources and mobilizing staff. And I'm really inspired by Charlotte tonight as well, and hearing her speaking passionately and knowledgeably and firsthand experience from a sibling perspective. We've got a lot that we could capitalize on that as well. So thank you very much for Inclusion Canada, Inclusive Education Canada for your continued efforts. And Inclusion International, Diane, you're just a true gem.
Right. Okay, Diane, final word.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing to just have the network that we do around the world. And harking back to what I said earlier about the compliment that one of the guests at our conference made about the range of people that we have involved. So to think that on this panel, we have a sibling, a mom, a former minister, an education guru, and we've got that kind of network in Canada. So one of the observations from one of the participants was this concern about if we focus internationally, do we risk not paying enough attention to what's at home? I think we need to do both. I think we need to use the experiences in the same way that Monica's been inspired by going to New Brunswick, I've been inspired by going to Colombia. So, and the work that's being done there in some very difficult situations in very remote areas with refugees and we've got a lot to learn from each other. And I think we need to be grateful that we have each other and that we can take advantage of this network. And great to see the people who have been participants here, because I think there are a lot of people on the call who can really contribute. So I hope Inclusive Education Canada, Gordon and Charlotte, you'll find a way to involve them and maybe to keep some of this discussion going forward.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to the folks who've tuned in. And if you have, and you want to follow up and share it with friends and neighbors and colleagues, it will be posted on our Inclusive Education Canada website. And there'll be links on our Facebook page and other social media. So you can follow up there. And this is one of what we hope are many webinars that we'll be holding during the coming year. And there are a lot of topics. There are a lot of things that we can share and talk about together. And tonight's been a good opportunity to do that. So thank you to each of our panelists again. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night.
Thank you.